Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. It's Friday, and I'm on my own for KSA this week. Just the way that the schedule worked out made this the most convenient for me for recording. So what I'd like to talk about a bit is the most recent episode and some of the things that have come out of it. These thoughts will pertain to upcoming episodes as well, but I can talk about them without giving anything away. The last couple of episodes, particularly the most recent one, really didn't go the way I expected them to. With the arrival in Shaytirias Talai, I intended there to be a small combat encounter, that being the Displacer Beasts, as a way of reintroducing Ari, giving Eric a chance to show off his new abilities as a Hexblade, and play around with them a little bit because, you know, you get a new character sheet, you want to try everything out, kick the tires, that kind of thing, various other metaphors. So that went about where I intended it to. We were going to have a little Displacer Beast fight, meet new Ari, give Ari a chance to give a brief overview of what happened to him, and then proceed. And I intended to introduce the undead giant, undead giants, as a reality of Shaytirias Talai. We've established that it's thousands of years later, and that many giants die, or the giants destroyed the city. In the process of that, lots of giants died, and so I wanted to have something interesting there, and also to hint at some other things about the city that we'll see going forward. So I wanted to introduce these, that there were undead giants roaming the city, just not intelligent, not, lich giants or mummy giants or anything like that, just giant corpses that had become reanimated, as you often see in fantasy at the site of great death and destruction. And I actually intended them to be a skill challenge because I assumed that the thing that you would do immediately upon seeing a 30-foot tall skeleton walking through the streets would be to get out of their way. And it never occurred to me in all my time DMing that the first thing you would try to do is talk to it. I'm not saying that was a bad choice or a wrong choice. It may, practically speaking, have been a bad choice, but I'm not saying it was a wrong choice. But it was a choice that had never occurred to me. And I know I've got a very talky party on Khyber Shards, and that's actually one of the reasons I made the giants skeletons, because skeletons aren't intelligent. They don't talk back. So it just didn't occur to me that they would try. But they did. And so that meant that instead of hiding and beginning a stealth and escape skill challenge, we started talking to it. It stood there for a long time. I started rolling. I roll physical dice, partly because I prefer physical dice, but I also roll physical dice because there's a sound. And when I start rolling repeatedly, players know GM starts rolling repeatedly and not saying anything. The GM is checking for something. And I was just rolling to see when the giant noticed this group of little people sitting there blithely talking in the wood. And then the giant starts moving towards them. And I played that slow because I was trying to hint, run. But they didn't. And in fact, they handled it. Ari used suggestion. I'm not 100% sure whether most DMs would have allowed suggestion to work quite that way. But to my mind, the giant, it doesn't have much will. So why shouldn't it work? I'm happy to be disagreed with and hear why you think. Well, I would love to hear whether you as a DM would have allowed that to happen, and if not, why not? I'm curious what your reasons are, because I've thought about it a lot since then, and I'm not sure whether that was a on-label use of suggestion or not. It seemed okay to me, and I read the spell again, and it seemed okay to me. But I would love to hear thoughts from other DMs. So let me know what you think down there in the comments. Anyway. So Ari handled it in an entirely unexpected way. And so now we're back. We're back on track. And I have planned out in my notes. This is what my notes more or less looked like for Shaytirias Talai. And I know they're still there, but this is basically what the notes looked like. I expected this to be a skill challenge mixed with a mix of One, avoiding the giants, and two, finding the people that I had hinted were there so that they could eventually find the Sphinx, getting clues from the various creatures that still dwell among the ruins about the location of the Sphinx. And I estimated how long this would take in terms, and I'm almost always wrong, so I don't take too much stock by estimate. But I estimated spending 3, maybe 4 episodes in Chez Tyrius to Life, with an emphasis towards 3, which in a long night of recording we could do in one night. That estimate, for a variety of reasons, is now an underestimate of the time, not hugely, but somewhat. That was my intended path, and what I had done is I had created a list of things that I thought might be roaming about Chez Tyrius to Lie. Undead things, of course. Maybe some unquiet spirits haunting old houses. Some fae, where we've established that it's a manifest zone to Thelanis, so fae creatures. And that's why I brought the Displacer Beasts in, because it seemed to me quite reasonable that Displacer Beasts would hunt in a place where fae creatures were common. And one of the things I put on my list, because I decided it would make a lot of sense, was a patrol from the Death Guard. Now, the Death Guard are a thing in Eberron lore. They're a group based out of Arenal, the Elven island nation of Arenal, which is a little north off the coast of Zendrik. Arenal is ruled by the Undying Court, as we established in the episode, and the Death Guard seek out necromancy. They seek out and destroy undead created by means of necromancy. The Irani elves have a means of maintaining life beyond death that does not use the negative planar energies from Mabar that necromancy does. So it's a delightful irony that Keith Baker developed, where there are essentially undead elves who are not created by means of necromancy, and who in fact really, really find necromancy really repellent, because they believe that it actively harms the world when it's used. And considering that when you practice necromancy, you are drawing on the plane of unlife, the opposite of the plane of life, there's some logic to the theory that necromancy might be bad for the world. It might be a pollutant, a magical pollutant on the world. And so the Death Guard solve this by hunting down necromantic undead, and often necromancers. And it occurred to me, this is not a Keith Baker thing, but I decided that the Death Guard probably maintained a presence near old elven ruins. And so I thought to myself, what's a Death Guard patrol look like? And I decided it was a member of the Death Guard who would be an elf paladin, and a few undying soldiers. So I created that as a patrol, and I added that to my list of possible encounters in Chez Tyrius to Lie, along with more undead giants, unquiet souls, various fae creatures, a few things that I thought might be interesting to interact with or fight. So that's my setup. So we stop the giant, and we're back on track to begin our skill challenge to make our way to the Sphinx. So Shade sets off scouting, and okay, sure, we'll get some successes by Shade scouting. And then Eric asks me, does this giant have a bag? And I'm just such a believer in yes and that I said yes. Now, I could have kept them on the path that I had planned by saying no, and it would be perfectly reasonable. This giant has been walking around here for many thousands of years. Why in the world has its bag survived? But I decided this would be interesting. It would be fun to give them a little bit of some interesting trinkets that they could find in the giant's bag. And I remembered that there was a table in Volo's Guide to Monsters of what you might find in a giant's bag. So awesome, let's do it. And so I rolled on the table and I drew the things that they found off of the table in Volo's Guide. For the most part, there were a few things in Volo's Guide that I thought, it doesn't really make sense for a giant in Zendrik. but sure. And then it started to get, they started to have fun and get goofy with it. And at a certain point, I just had to admit, this is loud. At the point where we push the bird cage out of the giant's pouch and it falls 15 feet to the ground, this is loud. So I rolled on the table to see what noticed them. And I rolled the death guard. So I rolled to estimate how long will it take the death guard to get there, and started counting. And then, again, unsurprisingly, because he's playing around with his new abilities, makes perfect sense, Esri raises an undead, and paladins can sense the presence of undead. And I thought it would be interesting to manifest that in the Undying Soldiers as being sort of acting as bloodhounds and trackers for the paladin who commands their unit. And that's where the Esri starts hearing their voices. And I tried to make clear that we have a hostile presence incoming, or a potentially hostile presence incoming, thinking we'll hide. And so they hide. Great. Back on track. Back where I think we should be, hiding, sneaking, making our way to the Sphinx. And then Eric unleashes the giant. Awesome. Hysterical. Like, fantastic use of the environment. And then Eric realizes, I think, what happened. I would be interested to ask him, but I think what happened. Eric realizes, Ari wouldn't want to see these people die. And either Ari didn't realize the catastrophic potential of this giant, or maybe Eric just thought it would be funny and then realized, my character would have feelings about that. And so rather than sneaking away, which I fully expected them to do, instead of sneaking away, we decide to talk into the elf's head while he's trying to fight a giant. Made him react appropriately to that. And then we decide to run out and try to help, revealing ourselves. So at this point, we're revealed to the Death Guard. And so now we're going to have an encounter with the Death Guard, with one of our players being an amateur necromancer with the Mark of Death. And the Death Guard are one of the only groups of people on the planet, well, the Iranian in general, but the Death Guard in particular, are one of the only groups of people on the planet who are going to instantly recognize the Mark of Death. Now, did I kind of poke that thread to get Esri to show his mark? Yes, I did. Of course I did. Because I have been so excited to learn more about Esri's mark. And it hasn't been a priority for Esri, so why not? But again, I'm not going to force it. Esri's mark is on his palms. He's doing a lot of things with his palms. It's not the most obvious mark. But the elf is smart. I roll insight. You're a druid. How are you able to do this? Lots of potential answers. Esri chooses show the mark. I think Adam had an idea of where this was going. I don't know. I'd have to ask him. But I think Adam had an idea of where this was going and decided to yes and. Decided the most interesting thing to do right there was show the mark. And that's where the episode ends, of course, is with the elf declaring his intention. So all this to say, that episode did not go the way I expected it to go. It didn't go anything like the way I expected it to go. Many things that I expected to be there were there, but the player choices led me in a completely different direction. I get credited with being really, really good at improvisation quite often. And I'm not going to, do the false humility thing. I'm pretty good at DM improvisation. But it's not always me making something up out of whole cloth. What this was, none of this was just, pulled out of thin air. I had all of these things in my notes. I just kept having to rearrange them. And I think that's really the key of responding to players going, I don't like the phrase off the rails, because that implies that DMs are always railroading their characters. And I have actually not encountered very many DMs who do. But when players go into an unexpected direction, I think one of the tricks is not to try and invent something new, The trick is to look at what you've got and rearrange it to fit the new trajectory. So it might be good to think, instead of thinking of your session prep notes as an outline, to more think of your session prep notes as tiles. So you could, if you're really tactile, even write your session prep notes out on index cards instead of on a single sheet of paper. And I think that might actually be kind of interesting. And as it goes, you can move them around, rearrange them, rebuild the session over and over again as the players do things you didn't think they would do. I'm not, again, I want to make it very clear. I don't think any of the player choices made in the last episode were wrong. They were just not the ones I expected. They were not always optimal if the goal is get to the Sphinx in the most efficient way possible. But I think a lot of the times what was happening was not players not thinking ahead. I think a lot of times the players thinking, what will happen if? Or wouldn't the story be cool if? And I love that in players. I love it when players do that. And I like when players keep me on my toes. So it was fun. But that's kind of the behind the screen process of this. In terms of what, the lore stuff that happened in the episode, I really got a kick out of people anticipating what was going to happen with Ezri encountering the Undying. It was a comment on the video of, so they were against all 12 houses, and now they're also against the Undying. Are you sure they're not the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants? I thought that was kind of funny. The Undying are not evil. It should be noted. The Undying are actually good, but in general, the Undying Court is a good entity, a good aligned entity. And, the Paladin that they fight might be good aligned, right? I mean, we don't know at this point, but might be good aligned. Just because Ezri is not evil doesn't mean that the Paladin here is necessarily wrong. It's what we have here is two opposing worldviews. This Paladin's been alive a long time. He understands the danger of necromancy. Ezri didn't ask to be a necromancer. He's just innately good at it. Admittedly, he obviously enjoys it, has an affinity for it, takes pleasure in the science of it. But we don't really have the impression that Ezri is looking to raise an undead horde and conquer the world. So it's more of a matter of uncompromising. Ezri's unwilling to compromise on you killed my skeleton. The elf is unwilling to compromise on you raised a skeleton. And so, here we go. I can't wait for the next episode. It's going to be bonkers. We have a couple of questions. One, Emily asks, in your Eberron, did the Undying Court form on Zindrik or in Aerenal? I would normally assume the latter, but I'm unsure given the spirit idol. The Undying Court exists on Aerenal. So the Undying Court are the best and greatest of the Irani elves' culture. And they are maintained alive by a manifest zone to Irian, which is the plane of life and positive energy. And that allows them to be maintained. However, no member of the Undying Council, the actual Undying Court, could stay alive for very long away from Aerenal. Once they left Aerenal, the magic that suffuses them would start to fade, and eventually they would die. And to my mind, I'm not sure that this is specifically stated in any of the books, but in my Eberron at least, an Undying Counselor that's been alive longer would be more and more reliant on the energy of Irian. And so some of the oldest Undying Counselors couldn't leave at all. If they tried to leave, they would just die. But lesser Undying soldiers, things like that are brought back using positive energy or are made immortal using positive energy, are younger, typically, and so they can go abroad longer without dying. And many elves that serve the Undying Court aren't actually undying themselves, but they often decorate themselves to look undead. And Irani art has a very macabre style to it. It usually gets pictured in a very Mesoamerican form, although I tend to picture Iranian culture more Japanese, just something that's always been in my head, which you could probably tell from the thumbnail on the last episode. So the presence of a group of Undying soldiers and a group and an Iranian paladin on Zindrik is perfectly normal. There are death guards assigned to all of the major continents, and each of them have a cohort of paladins that serve them. So there's a death guard warden, I think is the title, for Zindrik, one for Arenal, one for Corvair, one for Arganessen, one for Sarlona, I think. And each of them has a cohort of paladins that serve them, and the paladins lead troops of Undying soldiers in their patrols. So they're kind of a special forces or a I don't know, U.S. Marshals sort of entity where they're small units patrolling for a very specific thing. They're not a member of the Iranian. They're not part of the Iranian regular army, as it were. And I think actually the Death Guard would make a great adventuring company concept if you wanted a concept party. I think then the Undying Death Guard would be really cool. Oh man, actually, I just developed a whole little campaign thing where they're all playing Undying Revenants. Okay. Anyway, stay on task. So, yes, the Undying Court is on Arenal, but the Undying Court in all of the Eberron sources have agents everywhere. This is not a member of the Undying Court that they've encountered. It's an agent of the Undying Court serving in the Death Guard. So hopefully that clears that up. Sorry if there was any confusion. Then Mia asks, have you ever frozen up as a DM and not been able to come up with a response to a situation your players have gotten into? If so, how did you handle it? I've been trying to think of this, and I've DM'd a lot. I'm absolutely certain that I have, and I was trying to think of an example where I could say how I handled it. Probably the most notable example is the first campaign I ran. We ran an adventure where the party were trying to break into the Dreadhold, which is Eberron's sort of Alcatraz-like prison. They'd gotten in, and I had given them a whole bunch of hints that I thought would lead them down into the mines where prisoners do hard labor in Dreadhold. But the players decided, well, obviously the person who knows where we're looking for is going to be the warden, so let's go to the warden. And the warden's office, according to the map that I had given them, so I couldn't just change it, was on the top level. So the players are now going the opposite direction of the adventure that I've written. So I froze. And I tried to make them turn around. They would go around and say, nothing here. Oh, nope, some guards. Oh, nothing here. Oh, there's some guards. I tried to herd them back onto the adventure. Sometimes you can do this in an intelligent and thoughtful way. I was just trying to put walls in their way. And because players tend to be persistent, they kept trying to find ways around the walls, and I wasn't gonna, try and force them by saying, no, you can't go that way. It didn't sound fun, so I kept making it up. And by the time they made it up to the top floor, I had started to feel it out, invent some things to be there. And by the time they made it up there, I had an idea of the warden and what the encounter with the warden would be like and how they could deal with it. Admittedly, at the end of the encounter with the warden, they killed the warden. At the end of the encounter with the warden, they got the warden's keys as a reward, but also they discovered from searching through the warden's desk that what they were looking for was still back down at the bottom. And so they then had to retrace their steps back down and then proceed into the adventure I had written. So it wasn't perfect. But no, I really tried to force them to turn around, and they just wouldn't. And that's often the temptation when the players go off track, is you want to try and force them to turn around. But I've learned that the adventure was more fun for everyone because you can spend a long time trying to force them to turn around. What fun is that? The adventure is more fun for everyone if you learn to adapt. That's not to say wherever they go is the right direction. If you've got a dungeon mapped out and they head towards the death trap, that's where they're headed. That's the dungeon they're in. And if that's the kind of dungeon you want to run, let them know ahead of time. This is a really deadly thing in the campaign when you're doing session 0. But in a story point kind of adventure like this one, it's better to be able to rearrange. I'm really lucky that I had all the pieces in various places in my notebook for the stuff that happened during this arc and that will happen in future episodes during this arc. Um, I had all those pieces in my notebook. Not all those pieces were intended to happen here. I didn't actually intend this to align with Ari's personal story either. That was a scheduling thing that happened. It wasn't my original plan. I really intended this to just be Shade's arc, but here we go. And so we tack on, we add on the Ari story, and it's been great. It's turned out really well. It wasn't something I anticipated, but a scheduling process came up, so you adapt. So I would strongly advise thinking of your adventure planning as tiles and not an outline, and that makes it a lot easier to rearrange them on the fly, especially visually, especially if you're very visual or tactile. It's a lot easier to rearrange what's happening on the fly. I have kind of an equivalent of that, I suppose. I have a little disc-bound notebook that I really like. And one of the things I like about it is very easy to rearrange the pages if I need to. And I actually end up doing that later on in this arc, needing to pull a page from much later in my notebook and just bring it up here to deal with something that I had kind of thought would be cool, but didn't anticipate having a reason to do now. So hopefully that was interesting and useful. If you're a DM, I hope that's useful. I'd love to know what you think of that advice, and I'd love to know about times where your players have gone away from the beaten path and how you handled it and what came out of it. Because my experience is that when the players surprise me, there's usually a lot of fun to be had. Not always, but usually. So let me know your experiences down in the comments below. While you're down there, you can take a look at our description, and you will find links to all of our social media, including our Discord and our merch store. And while you're down there, if you would please hit some of them buttons, it really does help our algorithm. We have been seeing a little bit of a trend up. It's small, but it's there, and that's been encouraging. But regardless, thank you so much for the questions. Thank you so much for watching. New episodes of Khyber Shards come out every Monday. New Khyber Shards answers every Friday. And until next time, thanks for rolling with us.